Have you ever noticed how the cross is everywhere? It rises high above churches, stands proudly on national flags, hangs from necklaces, and marks hospitals and humanitarian missions. It is carved into ancient stones, painted in sacred halls, and carried in the hands of millions across the globe. For many, it is a sacred emblem of faith. For others, it is a cultural symbol so common that its presence often fades into the background of daily life. But what if I told you that this simple shape carries a history far older and far more complex than most people realize? Its story reaches back thousands of years to the dawn of human civilization. It passes through temples of forgotten gods, across the sands of Egypt, through the streets of the Roman Empire, and into the heart of one of the most transformative moments in world history. What began as a universal mark of life and power would be turned into an instrument of suffering and death, only to be transformed again into a sign of hope, victory, and salvation. Today, the cross stands as one of the most recognizable symbols on earth, but its journey to that point is filled with mystery, transformation, and the powerful forces of belief and empire. This is the story of the cross, from its ancient origins to its place at the center of human history. And it is a story that may change the way you see this familiar shape forever. Long before the cross became a sacred emblem for millions, its shape appeared in cultures that had never heard of Christianity. In the earliest days of human civilization, long before written history, people searched for symbols to make sense of the world around them. They looked at the stars, the seasons, and the forces of nature, trying to express ideas about life, death, power, and the universe. Among the many shapes they carved into stone and painted on walls, the simple intersecting lines of a cross held a special place. In ancient Egypt, one of the oldest and most sophisticated civilizations, a symbol known as the Ankh emerged. It looked like a cross with a loop at the top. Egyptians called it the key of life. They believed it represented eternal existence and divine power. Gods and pharaohs were often shown holding the Ankh as if presenting the gift of life to humanity. It appeared on temple walls, tombs, amulets, and royal artifacts. For the people of Egypt, this shape was not a decoration. It was a spiritual key that connected the world of the living to the realm of the gods. Farther east, in Mesopotamia, where some of the earliest cities were built, the cross-like shape was also present. It appeared in carvings, on seals, and within religious architecture. The cross represented the four corners of the earth and the forces that held the cosmos together. To these ancient peoples, the intersecting lines stood for balance and order in a universe that could often feel unpredictable and dangerous. In ancient India, cross forms were part of sacred geometry. They were used to mark cosmic directions, symbolizing the structure of the universe. In many temples, the floor plans themselves were based on symmetrical cross patterns, designed to mirror the harmony between heaven and earth. Across the Mediterranean, early Greek cultures used cross shapes in pottery, mosaics, and shrines. These designs were not simply artistic flourishes. They reflected humanity's shared instinct to express powerful ideas through simple and enduring shapes. The cross also had a place in ancient astronomy and agriculture. Farmers and priests watched the skies, tracking the sun's path as it crossed from one season to another. The intersection of lines often represented the meeting point between heaven and earth, or the turning of time itself. For many, the cross became a visual way to explain the rhythms of the cosmos and the cycles that governed life. What is remarkable is how widespread this shape became, even in cultures that had no direct contact with one another. From the banks of the Nile to the plains of Mesopotamia, from the temples of India to the islands of the Aegean, humanity kept returning to the same form. The cross was not owned by any one group. It belonged to a shared human imagination that searched for meaning in the patterns of nature and the structure of existence. These early uses of the cross carried no connection to the story of Jesus or Christianity. They were part of a much older language of symbols that spoke to life, power, and the cosmos. Over time, these symbols became deeply woven into the spiritual and cultural fabric of the ancient world. They stood in temples and tombs, on jewelry and statues, and in the daily lives of people who believed that the universe could be understood through sacred shapes. As centuries passed, empires rose and fell, and new religions emerged. Yet the image of the cross persisted. It traveled across trade routes, carved into stone and cast into metal, carried by merchants, priests, and conquerors. It survived cultural shifts because it spoke to something universal, something that lay at the core of human thought. Before it became a tool of execution, before it was raised on a hill outside Jerusalem, the cross was already ancient. It was already a bridge between worlds, between the human and the divine, between the seen and the unseen. This is where the journey begins, not in a single moment of religious revelation, but in the slow unfolding of human history. The cross started as a shared symbol of life and cosmic balance, quietly spreading through civilizations that shaped the foundations of the world we know today. It was only a matter of time before this powerful shape would find a new and very different role in the story of humanity. As human societies grew more complex, the cross continued to evolve as a symbol, adapting to new cultural and religious landscapes. Ancient civilizations began to merge, trade, and influence one another, carrying their symbols with them like invisible luggage. In markets where merchants exchanged spices and gold, symbols traveled alongside goods, spreading across deserts, seas, and mountains. The cross was among the shapes that made this silent journey, finding new meanings in each place it touched. In the great empires of the Near East, the cross was sometimes linked to the movements of heavenly bodies. Priests and astronomers used cross shapes to chart the paths of stars and planets. They marked the solstices and equinoxes with intersecting lines, believing that these cosmic events reflected divine order. Temples were often designed with layouts that aligned with celestial points, and cross patterns were carved into altars where offerings were made to the gods. To them, this shape was not just a symbol. It was a tool for understanding the structure of the universe. As trade expanded toward the Mediterranean, cross-like motifs began appearing in places as distant as Crete and the Cycladic Islands. In the Minoan civilization, artisans used symmetrical crosses to decorate pottery, frescoes, and sacred objects. These designs often had circular elements around the center, representing cycles of life, nature, and the heavens. Greek craftsmen would later adapt similar designs in their temples and public spaces, blending geometry with spiritual symbolism. In Northern Europe, early tribes carved cross patterns into standing stones and burial markers. Many of these carvings predated the arrival of Christianity by centuries. Archaeologists have found crosses etched into megalithic monuments and stone circles, sometimes arranged to align with the rising and setting of the sun. These communities associated the cross with the turning of the seasons and the fertility of the land. In their worldview, the cross marked the invisible lines that connected earth and sky. In Persia and Central Asia, cross-like symbols merged with local spiritual traditions. Zoroastrianism, one of the oldest known monotheistic religions, used geometric patterns that included intersecting lines to express cosmic dualities such as light and darkness, good and evil. Although the exact meanings varied, the structure of the cross often appeared in religious art and architecture. These shapes were not meant to represent any deity directly, but rather the underlying balance of existence. What is striking during this period is the flexibility of the cross as a symbol. It could mean eternal life in Egypt, cosmic structure in Mesopotamia, seasonal cycles in Europe, or duality in Persia. It adapted easily because its form was simple yet profound. Two intersecting lines could hold an infinite number of meanings, depending on the cultural lens through which they were viewed. This adaptability ensured its survival as civilizations shifted, merged, and fell. As the ancient world moved into the classical era with the rise of Greek and later Roman power, the cross remained embedded in daily life, art, and spiritual practice. It was often seen as a decorative element in mosaics, pottery, and textiles. In some places, it was worn as a talisman for protection or good fortune. In others, it was etched into temple stones as a way to honor cosmic order. By the time Rome began expanding across Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East, the cross was already everywhere, familiar to countless peoples for countless reasons. This wide distribution would later play a crucial role in how the symbol was received when it became tied to a new and shocking purpose. Before that transformation, the cross was a versatile and ancient sign, woven into the fabric of many societies. It stood quietly in the background of history, waiting for a moment that would redefine its meaning forever. The stage was being set for a new empire, one that would use the cross in a way no civilization had before. The Roman world was rising, and with it would come both the brutality and the transformation that would change this timeless symbol into something the ancient world had never imagined. As the Roman Empire expanded its reach across Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East, it brought with it a new political order and a strict system of law and punishment. Rome was a civilization built on discipline and control. Its legions marched with precision, its cities were laid out with mathematical regularity, and its government relied on both rewards and fear to maintain authority over millions of people. To rule such a vast and diverse territory, the Romans needed a way to send clear and unmistakable messages to those who might oppose them. One of the most powerful tools they used was public execution. Among the methods at their disposal, crucifixion stood out as the most brutal and humiliating. The practice itself did not originate in Rome. It was likely borrowed from older civilizations such as the Persians or Carthaginians. But the Romans perfected it, turning it into both a punishment and a spectacle designed to break the will of those who watched. Crucifixion involved binding or nailing a person to a wooden structure, often shaped like a T or a cross. The condemned would be stripped, beaten, and forced to carry the horizontal beam, called the patibulum, to the place of execution. There, it would be fastened to a vertical post already fixed in the ground, forming the familiar shape we now associate with the cross. Death by crucifixion was slow and agonizing. Victims could hang for hours or even days, struggling to breathe as their bodies weakened. The Romans chose this method precisely because it combined maximum suffering with maximum visibility. Executions were often carried out along busy roads or at city gates where large crowds would pass. The sight of a crucified person served as a stark reminder of Roman power and the consequences of defiance. It was not just a way to eliminate criminals, it was psychological warfare. This punishment was reserved for the lowest in society and for those who challenged Roman authority. Roman citizens were usually exempt from crucifixion as it was considered too shameful. Instead, it was inflicted on slaves, rebels, and foreigners. The cross became a symbol of state terror, a warning that the empire could reach anyone, anywhere. Historical records describe mass crucifixions following revolts, such as the aftermath of the Spartacus uprising, when thousands of rebels were crucified along the Appian Way. The road became lined with crosses, each bearing a body, turning the landscape into a horrifying message from the empire to its people. In Roman society, the cross carried no sacred meaning. It was an instrument of death and disgrace. To be associated with the cross was to be marked as defeated and despised. Families of the condemned often avoided claiming the bodies because of the shame attached to crucifixion. The condemned were seen as enemies of the state, stripped not only of life, but of dignity. The physical structure of the cross itself varied. Some were simple poles, while others had crossbeams or even additional footrests and plaques that displayed the crime of the condemned. The Romans were not concerned with symbolism. They were focused on efficiency and the fear such executions inspired. Over time, crucifixion became deeply embedded in the machinery of Roman rule. It was used to suppress uprisings, punish bandits, and intimidate conquered peoples. Yet, ironically, it was within this system of terror that the cross would soon be given a completely different significance. A single crucifixion in a distant province of the empire would transform the meaning of this instrument forever. The Romans saw it as a tool to crush resistance. But history would remember it as the stage for a story that would change the world. The empire's roads were filled with the grim sight of wooden crosses. Its citizens walked past them every day, barely noticing, because they were part of the social landscape. No one could have imagined that one execution among many would elevate this symbol from a mark of fear to a beacon of faith. The cross, once a Roman weapon of humiliation, was standing on the edge of a transformation that would echo through centuries. In the early decades of the 1st century, the Roman Empire ruled over Judea, a small but culturally rich province in the eastern Mediterranean. It was a land of deep religious tradition and growing political tension. Roman governors maintained order through military presence and harsh laws, but beneath the surface, many groups longed for liberation. Some hoped for a political revolt. Others placed their faith in religious prophecies of a coming savior who would free them from foreign rule. It was in this environment that a teacher from Nazareth began to gather followers. His name was Jesus. Jesus traveled through towns and villages, speaking about forgiveness, compassion, and the coming of the kingdom of God. He healed the sick, welcomed the outcasts, and challenged the established authorities in ways that inspired some and angered others. Crowds followed him, hoping to witness miracles or to hear words that offered hope in a time of oppression. Religious leaders viewed him with suspicion, and Roman officials kept a wary eye on any movement that might spark unrest. The final days of Jesus' life took place during the festival of Passover, a time when Jerusalem swelled with pilgrims from across the region. Roman soldiers increased their presence to prevent any uprising. In this tense atmosphere, Jesus entered the city and was greeted by crowds waving branches and calling him a king. For the Roman authorities, this was a dangerous moment. They had seen how quickly crowds could turn into revolts, and a figure being hailed as a king, even a spiritual one, could not be ignored. According to historical accounts preserved in the Gospels, Jesus was arrested after a series of confrontations with religious authorities. He was taken before the Jewish council, then brought to the Roman governor, Pontius Pilate. The charges were political as much as religious. He was accused of claiming to be the King of the Jews, a title that in Roman eyes amounted to treason. Pilate questioned him, but ultimately allowed the execution to proceed. The decision reflected the Roman approach to governance. It was better to remove a potential source of unrest than risk rebellion. Jesus was sentenced to death by crucifixion, the same punishment Rome reserved for rebels and criminals who threatened its authority. He was scourged, mocked, and forced to carry the horizontal beam of his cross through the streets toward the place of execution. The journey was a public procession meant to humiliate the condemned and warn others against defiance. The hill where the execution took place was called Golgotha, meaning the place of the skull. There, Roman soldiers nailed him to the cross and raised it upright, leaving him to die in the same manner they had inflicted upon countless others. For bystanders, this was a familiar sight. Crucifixions were not rare events. People walking by might have looked up at the crosses without much thought, because they had seen scenes like this many times before. But for the followers of Jesus, this was a devastating moment. Their teacher, the one they believed to be chosen by God, hung on a Roman cross as a condemned man. To the empire, he was just another rebel crushed under its authority. To his followers, it was a tragedy that shook their world. The Gospels describe how Jesus died after several hours on the cross. His body was taken down and placed in a tomb. Roman soldiers guarded the site to prevent any tampering. At this point in history, there was nothing to suggest that this execution would be remembered differently from thousands of others carried out by Rome. Yet in the days that followed, his followers claimed that they had encountered him alive again. This belief became the foundation of a movement that would eventually spread across the Roman world and beyond. The cross, which had been a symbol of terror and humiliation, now took on a new and unexpected meaning. For those who believed that Jesus had risen, the cross was no longer a sign of defeat. It became the proof of sacrifice and the doorway to salvation. The instrument of execution was transformed into a symbol of divine love and victory over death. This reinterpretation of the cross did not happen overnight. It began in small, scattered communities of believers who met in secret, sharing stories and breaking bread together. In the eyes of the Roman authorities, Christianity was still a minor sect within Judaism, not a threat to the empire. But within these small groups, the meaning of the cross was changing rapidly. What had once inspired fear now inspired faith. What had been designed to break the human spirit became the foundation of spiritual hope. This transformation marked a turning point in history. A single crucifixion, carried out in a distant province, began to reshape the understanding of one of the empire's most feared symbols. As the message of Jesus spread from city to city, the cross would slowly move from the periphery of Roman punishment to the center of a new and growing faith. It was the beginning of a journey that would change the meaning of the cross forever.
In the years following the crucifixion, the Roman Empire continued its rule as it always had. Crucifixions took place on dusty hills, trade routes thrived, and the empire's machinery of power kept turning. Yet beneath the surface, something new was spreading quietly through cities, villages, and distant provinces. The followers of Jesus began to share their belief that his death on the cross was not the end, but the beginning of something extraordinary. For these early believers, the cross represented the ultimate act of sacrifice. They saw in the suffering of Jesus a message of redemption and hope. Instead of being crushed by the sight of the cross, they embraced it. They believed that through his death and resurrection, death itself had been defeated. This belief was radical in the Roman world. It turned a symbol of shame into a symbol of triumph. At first, Christians did not use the cross openly. Their communities were small and often persecuted, and Roman authorities viewed any movement that rejected the state's power with suspicion. To avoid attracting unwanted attention, early Christians adopted discrete symbols to express their faith. The fish, for example, became a hidden sign among believers. Simple drawings or carvings of intersecting lines might also have been used. But the public display of a cross would have been shocking to Roman eyes. To them, the cross was still an instrument of execution, not something to be honored. Despite the risks, the message continued to spread. Missionaries traveled along Roman roads, carrying the story of Jesus to new regions. Small gatherings took place in homes, catacombs, and hidden spaces where prayers were whispered and bread was broken in remembrance. Within these intimate circles, the cross was spoken of not as a tool of the empire, but as the place where divine love was revealed. This quiet transformation gave the cross a new life within the hearts of believers, as Christianity reached cities like Antioch, Alexandria, and Rome itself. The symbol of the cross began to take on more structured meaning. The writings of early Christian leaders described the crucifixion as the fulfillment of ancient prophecies. They explained that the cross, once a sign of punishment, had become the means of salvation. For believers, it was proof that even the might of the Roman Empire could be turned upside down by an act of divine purpose. The Roman world was not kind to those who rejected its gods. Emperors demanded loyalty, and public sacrifices to Roman deities were expected of everyone. Christians refused to take part in these rituals, declaring their allegiance to one God and one Savior. Their refusal led to waves of persecution. Some were imprisoned, others executed, and many were crucified themselves. Ironically, the empire continued to use the very method of execution that Christians saw as sacred. For believers, dying on a cross was no longer simply a punishment. It was an imitation of their Savior's sacrifice. Over time, the cross began to appear more frequently in Christian writings, prayers, and theological explanations. Church fathers spoke about it as the tree of life, a reversal of the tree of death, described in the story of Eden. They saw the cross as the meeting point between heaven and earth, where divine justice and mercy intersected. Even though the physical image of the cross was not yet displayed widely, its spiritual meaning grew deeper and more complex. By the 3rd century, Christianity had spread throughout much of the empire despite periodic persecution. Communities of believers were growing in number and influence. Underground cemeteries and catacombs reveal early Christian art in which simple cross shapes began to appear among symbols of hope and resurrection. These images were often subtle, woven into patterns or combined with other symbols like the anchor or the Chiro monogram. The cross was emerging from secrecy, slowly stepping into the light. This gradual shift was remarkable. A shape that once made people turn away in disgust was becoming something believers cherished and meditated upon. It was not a political statement yet. It was a spiritual one. The cross represented the paradox at the heart of their faith, that through suffering came victory, and through death came life. This transformation of meaning prepared the way for a dramatic turning point in history. Soon, the cross would move from private gatherings and hidden walls into the open spaces of cities and palaces. The rise of a single emperor would bring the symbol of the cross from the margins of society to the center of imperial power. The next chapter of its story would unfold not in secret catacombs, but on the grand stage of empire. The turning point in the story of the cross came in the early 4th century, during the rise of a man whose decisions would reshape the Roman world. His name was Constantine, born into a time of political turmoil and competing emperors. Constantine rose through military ranks with ambition and strategic brilliance. The Roman Empire was vast but fractured, and civil wars had left deep scars across its territories. Whoever could unite the empire would not only rule but define its future. In 312 CE, Constantine faced one of the most decisive moments of his life as he prepared for battle against his rival Maxentius near the Milvian Bridge outside Rome. Historical sources describe an event that would forever link his name to the cross. According to early Christian writers, Constantine saw a vision in the sky, a sign that he interpreted as divine. Some accounts speak of a radiant cross appearing above the sun, accompanied by words that meant, "In this sign, you will conquer." That night, Constantine reportedly ordered his soldiers to place a Christian symbol on their shields before marching into battle. The battle was fierce but brief. Constantine's forces emerged victorious, and he entered Rome as a conqueror. He attributed his success to the divine sign he had witnessed, and from that moment, his relationship with Christianity began to transform both his reign and the empire itself. Within a year, Constantine issued the Edict of Milan in 313 CE, granting religious tolerance to Christians and allowing them to worship openly without fear of persecution. For the first time, the cross could step out of the shadows and into public life. Under Constantine's patronage, Christianity gained unprecedented freedom and influence. Churches were built across the empire, including monumental structures in Rome, Jerusalem, and Constantinople. Christian symbols, including variations of the cross, began to appear on imperial banners, coins, and official buildings. The cross, once reserved for criminals and rebels, was now being carried in imperial processions. What had been a mark of humiliation was becoming a mark of power. This transformation was not instantaneous. Roman culture had centuries of association between the cross and execution. It took time for people to adjust to seeing this symbol in a completely new light. Yet Constantine's personal devotion and political support accelerated the process. He commissioned the construction of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem on the site believed to be near the crucifixion and burial of Jesus. Pilgrimages to Jerusalem increased, and stories spread about the discovery of relics associated with the crucifixion, including what was believed to be the true cross. Constantine's use of the cross was both spiritual and strategic. Aligning with Christianity helped him unify the empire under a single faith at a time when political divisions were dangerous. It also allowed him to harness the growing power of Christian communities, who now saw the emperor as a protector rather than a persecutor. The cross became a rallying point, not just for believers but for the empire itself. The symbolism deepened as Constantine adopted the labrum, a military standard bearing the Chiro monogram, which combined the first two letters of Christ's name in Greek. This emblem often appeared with a cross-like shape, merging imperial identity with Christian faith. Soldiers carried it into battle, and victories were celebrated under its sign. The cross was no longer a background figure in hidden catacombs. It was displayed on shields, flags, and monumental architecture. This period marked the beginning of the cross as a symbol of both faith and authority. Constantine did not make Christianity the official religion of the empire, but he set in motion a cultural shift that would soon make it central to Roman identity. What had begun as a story of a public execution had become a story of imperial transformation The change was so profound that within a few decades, the same empire that once crucified thousands would kneel before the cross as its highest emblem. The wooden structure once raised on dusty hills was now crowned in gold and lifted in ceremonies attended by emperors, bishops, and crowds of citizens. This new public role of the cross set the stage for its evolution into one of the most powerful religious symbols in history. It would no longer belong to a persecuted minority, but to a global faith that was expanding beyond the borders of the Roman world. Soon, the cross would not only stand in imperial capitals, but travel across continents, carried by missionaries, kings, and conquerors.
As the Roman Empire embraced Christianity, and the cross rose from a symbol of execution to a symbol of imperial faith, its influence began to spread far beyond the empire's borders. What began as a localized movement in a distant province now carried a universal message. The cross traveled along the same roads that once displayed its brutal form, but now it moved not as a warning of Roman power, but as a beacon of spiritual transformation dawned by the late 4th century. Christianity had become the dominant religion of the empire. In 380 CE, under Emperor Theodosius I, Christianity was declared the official state religion through the Edict of Thessalonica. This decision cemented the cross as the primary emblem of the empire's faith. Churches rose in every major city. Altars were decorated with crosses. Processions carried the symbol through streets that once witnessed crucifixions. What was once feared became revered as missionaries journeyed to distant lands. They carried the cross with them as both a sign of faith and a message of hope. In Europe, the cross appeared on hilltops, carved into stone, and raised over new places of worship. In Africa and the Middle East, it blended with local artistic styles, taking on new forms while retaining its core meaning. In Asia, it traveled along trade routes, carried by travelers and monks who shared the story of Jesus with new communities. The shape of the cross began to appear in mosaics, manuscripts, sculptures, and architecture, each culture giving it unique artistic expressions while preserving its spiritual significance. The cross also became intertwined with political power and identity. Kings and rulers adopted it as a sign of legitimacy and divine authority. When they raised the cross on their banners, they were not only declaring their faith, but also aligning their rule with a universal message. It appeared on crowns, seals, and coins, becoming a symbol that united kingdoms under a shared spiritual banner. The cross became both a personal expression of devotion and a public statement of allegiance. Throughout the Middle Ages, the cross shaped art, culture, and daily life. Cathedrals were built in the shape of a cross, with their floor plans reflecting the symbol's arms stretching out in all directions. Pilgrims traveled great distances to visit relics of the true cross or to see monumental crosses placed along sacred routes. Processions and rituals centered around the cross marked important religious festivals. The cross became a presence that shaped how people experienced their faith, their community, and their world. Its meaning, however, continued to deepen. For theologians and mystics, the cross represented the meeting point between heaven and earth, where divine love confronted human suffering. It became a symbol of endurance, redemption, and victory over death. It was no longer tied only to the historical crucifixion of Jesus, but was understood as a timeless sign of faith that transcended geography and era. The symbol also took on new forms across different Christian traditions. The Latin cross became prominent in Western Christianity, while the Greek cross, with arms of equal length, was favored in the East. The Celtic cross merged the Christian symbol with older cultural motifs, surrounding it with a ring that suggested eternity. The Orthodox cross included additional bars that carried theological meaning. Each variation reflected the diverse ways communities understood and experienced their faith, while maintaining the core story of the crucifixion and resurrection. The cross also became a rallying symbol in times of conflict and expansion. During the Crusades, European armies marched under the cross, believing they were fighting for a sacred cause. Ships that explored new lands carried crosses on their sails, signaling their mission to spread Christianity. Missionaries built churches in remote regions, often erecting crosses as the first visible sign of their presence. Through conquest, trade, and evangelism, the cross reached nearly every corner of the known world. Yet, even as it became a global emblem, the cross retained its personal and spiritual dimension. For individuals, it was something to wear, to pray before, or to trace over their bodies in moments of need. For communities, it stood at the center of worship, a reminder of shared beliefs and shared history. It united empires and villages alike under a single sign that had once been feared, but was now cherished. By the end of the medieval period, the cross was not just a religious icon, but a defining cultural symbol of entire civilizations. Its presence was carved into stone, painted on walls, embroidered into garments, and carried in hearts. From the Roman roads where criminals once struggled for breath, to distant lands where people heard the Christian story for the first time, the cross had journeyed far. Its transformation was complete. It had become one of the most recognized and powerful symbols in human history. As centuries passed, the cross continued to evolve in meaning and influence. Empires rose and fell, societies changed, and cultures interacted in ways the early believers could never have imagined. Yet the cross remained, adapting to new contexts while holding on to its core message. From the wooden beams on a hill outside Jerusalem to golden altars in cathedrals, from hidden symbols in catacombs to monumental structures that dominate city skylines, the journey of the cross reflects the journey of faith itself. In the modern world, the cross is everywhere. It stands atop churches in bustling cities and remote villages. It hangs around the necks of millions as a personal declaration of faith. It marks graves, hospitals, and places of worship. It appears in art, literature, and music, often carrying layers of meaning that reach beyond religion. For some, it represents spiritual hope and divine love. For others, it is a cultural inheritance, a reminder of centuries of history that shaped civilizations. The cross has also become a subject of reflection and debate. In a world of diverse beliefs, its presence invites questions about history, power, identity, and meaning. Some see it as a symbol of comfort and unity. Others remember its complex role in times of conquest and conflict. Its history carries both light and shadow, moments of profound compassion and moments of struggle between faiths and empires. To understand the cross is to understand a part of the human story itself, with all its triumphs and contradictions. In many places, the cross continues to inspire acts of devotion and service. It stands as a call to compassion, forgiveness, and resilience. Communities gather beneath it in times of joy and sorrow. Pilgrims still travel to holy sites, retracing ancient paths walked by generations before them. Artists reinterpret it through new styles, blending tradition with innovation. The cross endures not because it belongs to one time or place, but because it speaks to themes that are universal and timeless. For Christians, it remains the central symbol of their faith, representing the death and resurrection of Jesus and the promise of salvation. For historians, it is a lens through which to view the development of societies, empires, and cultures. For artists and thinkers, it is a shape that carries endless possibilities of expression. Its simplicity allows it to transcend boundaries, while its history roots it deeply in the human experience. The cross is no longer merely an object of the past. It is a living symbol that continues to shape the present and influence the future. Its story spans continents, languages, and centuries, weaving through personal lives and global movements. from a tool of punishment in ancient empires to a sign of hope embraced by millions. Its transformation is one of the most extraordinary in history. As we look at the cross today, whether on a distant steeple, in a museum, or in a quiet moment of reflection, we are not just seeing a shape. We are witnessing a story that began in pain and ended in profound significance. A symbol that once brought fear now brings meaning. A structure once meant to end lives has become a sign that continues to inspire them. The journey of the cross is a reminder that symbols can change the world. They carry the weight of history, the power of belief, and the ability to connect generations across time. The cross stands as a testament to humanity's capacity to transform suffering into hope and to give enduring meaning to even the darkest instruments of power. Its story is still being written in the lives of those who encounter it, making the cross not just a relic of the past, but a living part of the human narrative. The story of the cross is not just about wood and nails. It is about the power of transformation, the rise and fall of empires, and the ways in which humanity reshapes meaning over time. From the shadowed hills of ancient executions to the highest towers of cathedrals, the cross has carried with it the weight of history and the hopes of countless generations. Symbols hold power because we give them power. They mirror our fears, our faith, and our ambitions. The cross began as a tool meant to silence, but it became a voice that echoed across centuries. It reminds us that what is feared today can become sacred tomorrow, and that history is rarely as simple as it seems. As we uncover the layers of the past, we discover that every symbol has a story, every story has a hidden side, and every hidden side reveals something about who we are. The cross is more than a relic. It is a key to understanding the human journey. If you enjoyed exploring this story, remember to subscribe to Forbidden's Lore for more journeys into the forgotten corners of history. Together, we will keep unearthing the mysteries, the power, and the untold truths that shaped our world.